Cybersecurity Risks. Please welcome the session's moderator, Elizabeth Agosto, high-tech board member and Executive Director, Chief Operating Officer at BNY Mellon.
Is this on? Okay. So maybe I'll give folks a second. I see people are coming in. Okay, my high-tech familia, hola, hola. Thank you, thank you. So my name is Elizabeth Augusto. I am the Chief Operating Officer for the Information Security Division at BNY Mellon. I'm also one of the new high-tech board members. Whoop, whoop. So I'm so excited to be here with you today, more importantly in person. My God, moderating a panel virtually is painful. So I'm really excited. I've got some incredible, distinguished panelists here today with us who are going to shed all of their insights and best practices with you. Excuse me. As we start talking about, cyber risks and trends in the market and how we get ahead of them. So one of the things, just some housekeeping rules I like to start with. My goal for today's 40 minutes with you is I'm going to need your help to make this the best panel ever. Tim was very gracious to warm up the crowd for me, so thank you, Tim. Anyway, so without further ado, I'm going to start to introduce our panelists. So what I would ask from you is, as we are going through the discussion, start thinking about some of the questions. Excuse me, I'm going over a cold. Start thinking about your questions. It really helps to drive the discussion and make it a really fruitful one for us all. So let's get started with our panelists. I'll introduce one by one. So we have Heather Paquette. She is an audit partner at KPMG. Thank you, Heather.
Thank you.
Heather leads a team of over 800 professionals. I always like to start with a fun fact about all our panelists. It just kind of breaks the ice a little bit. So Heather, she was recognized by Cranes as one of Detroit's business 100 most influential women in Michigan. Go Heather. She's also a veteran of the U.S. Air Force, and she served in the UK.
Thank you.
Thank you for your service. And she also served in Southern Regional Operations Center for NATO in Naples, Italy. So, I mean, this was prior to joining KPMG, so she was pretty busy. Thank you, Heather. You're welcome. Our next panelist is Debbie Gasiola Maples. Debbie is Vice President, Global Safety and Security. She's part of the leadership team there at Salesforce, and she reports directly to the firm's CISO. Thank you, Debbie. Fun fact about Debbie, her daughter is actually an accomplished vocal artist. She performs under the name of Megan Maples and Mama Hayes, is that right? And I have to tell you, insane. I was listening to her yesterday. It's like a combination between Amy Winehouse and Adele. Insane. So welcome. Got to look her up. And last, but certainly not least, we have Diego Souza, a leader with extensive experience leading global cybersecurity organizations in Fortune 500 companies, such as GE, United Airlines, and more recently, he is the Global CISO at Cummins. Welcome, Diego. So, Diego shared his fun fact, like probably, 3 minutes before we started. So, his fun fact is that he's a trained judo competitor, and in his teenage years, his first fight lasted 10 seconds. But wait a minute. He lost a fight. So I thought it was important to add that piece to it. So anyway, without further ado, let's get started. Hello.
Hello.
Hello. So thank you for joining us here today. We have a lot of really interesting things to talk about here. I want to share some insights. Kind of want to go right into some of the questions as we think about how geopolitics and cybersecurity are intertwined, right? Senior leaders have to continuously think about, how the global impact against businesses and such. So I have a few questions to talk about that intertwine. My throat is killing me, sorry guys. How has your organization, and this question I'm going to start with Debbie, how has your organization adapted due to COVID? I know we think COVID is over, but it really isn't, right? We're still feeling the after effects. Are there specific areas that you're targeting and to counter the rising cyber threats and the actors? And have you had to adjust your approach to how you do things due to the Russia-Ukraine conflict? Debbie?
Okay, that's a big question, and let's unpack it a little bit. COVID, how did we adapt, and what are the changes that we needed to make with the threat landscape? The geopolitical environment is huge. There's Russia-Ukraine, there's China-Taiwan, there's Israel. There are a number of things to consider as a global organization. Mm-hmm. And so for sure, the relationship between our trust partners, so within Salesforce, trust is our number one value, and making sure that we are collaborating to be able to, one, inform our business leaders on how to understand the impact to our business with the threat landscape being what it is, but also to make sure that we are adjusting our strategy to maneuver. And so COVID being a global pandemic, active threat being huge, cyber threat being number one, lots of adjustments, lots of strategy, lots of investment into making sure that we are expanding our intelligence capability, that we are working in close collaboration with our trust partners.
Thank you, Debbie. And Heather, can you elaborate a little bit on that and add the context on how critical is collaboration and communication in this new environment?
Yeah, I think during the pandemic, our teams obviously went to remote, most of the companies that we work with. But some, if you're in manufacturing, obviously you couldn't make that move, but the level of communication only increased for our teams. And so having meaningful tools that you could collaborate with online was really important, and being able to have a lot of meetings and online, I guess, networking events, is part of that, is something that we saw an increase in. But it also increased the idea that our professionals, I think we have like 127,000 or 135,000 globally, that the level of information that they bring home or how they protect it, whether they're working in locations that they could be overheard, or how they're protecting our clients' information, became increasingly important. And so I think that we saw, making sure that the tools that we were using to collaborate were secure, that the VPNs that we used, timed out, and that they gave us the ability to make sure that we were resetting our connections on some frequencies, so there wasn't an ability for someone to track the information. And so really being able to both have collaboration and communication was important, but security is really important because of the information that we hold. And even the organizations that we interacted with, a lot of them went through the process of looking at virtual desktops, not allowing the information to be downloaded, and they also hold us to the same level of standards, whether it's password controls, robust password controls, or frequency of changes and things like that. So we definitely saw an increase on that. I think from a geopolitical perspective, which I think was the second part to the question, obviously a lot of the tensions on the globe, they wouldn't affect us as a business because we're a global business. So for us, we had to stop operations in some of those locations, and even our clients did as well. So we saw that they had to shut down operations, and my specialty is to do what's called SOC attestation reports. So I look at security, privacy, confidentiality, availability of large companies who offer software or services as part of that. So I definitely had clients that shut down their operations in Russia, for example. And so our ability to audit in that environment definitely went down. And you couldn't even get data. You couldn't get any information about it. You definitely couldn't check out the physical control of it. So once you shut down in any given country, you lose access to everything that you have there, basically. So I think that we definitely saw that. But we also see see the idea that with the geopolitical environment, it's increased that external threat of information in the organizations that we have, and that there are additional threat actors that are external, that are interested in our information as part of it, and then thinking about the broader impact in just business, in what the impact could be in business, and how, you know, just understanding certain information could be a threat to organizations or to society in general.
Thank you, Heather. Did you want to add something, Diego?
Yeah, I want to add something. I think throughout the COVID, two things for me was very clear. So from a geopolitical standpoint, we have seen a surge of massive new regulations in different countries where data needs to reside in the country specific, which puts a lot of more pressure on how the IT organization and the cyber organization needs to work together to ensure the data remains in that physical space called country, right?
Or a state, like
yeah.
California.
Yeah.
So a lot of privacy, intellectual property discussion around that. The second piece for me was about the shift from what I call disclosure to disruption. So what I have seen in the last few years is the threat landscape, because of geopolitical change, is where attackers are more focused on disrupting business other than getting information and disclose. For sure, they will continue to go after data because you're going to have espionage, intellectual properties that you want to get out there. But because of the number of massive breaches that we had in the past, Facebook, Equifax, there are so many data there. So now attackers are focused on disruption. So that's where operation technology, manufacturing, and companies like that type are suffering more because they were not too much focused in building up secure controls. That was part of the geopolitical change, because if you think about the APT, which is behind nations, how do I attack my enemy that I can disrupt? And a clear example of that was Colonial Pipeline, where you create a massive chaos in the country.
Yeah, and I think, the threat actors, they just keep getting more and more sophisticated. We've certainly seen an increase in phishing attempts and things like that. So my next question, as threat actors rebrand themselves, right? They continuously rebrand themselves. What actions have you taken personally to secure your personal data? And I'll start with Debbie.
Oh my goodness, I just got hacked.
Prime time.
And it's so embarrassing, right? My little Facebook account got hacked. But I think that, as you recognize that we are vulnerable, even the most expert of us that know how to have complex passwords, how to make sure that we're not using the same password for multiple channels throughout our devices. I think that although I would have said a week ago my discipline was high, my discipline was good, I am probably the person who is nagging my family and friends about strong security controls. We are all vulnerable, and I think that having just a high sense of awareness and a sense of urgency when something happens to our passwords or to our personal security is really what we have to do, and we have to be diligent and resilient with, okay, now what do I do now? And it's good to know people. It's good to reach out to your network. So do I have friends at Meta? Yes, I do. And did I ask for their help? Yes, I did. And I think that, what do I do personally? I make sure that professional network is strong. I am looking at the advice because it's ever changing, it's evergreen, right? So as cyber criminals become more sophisticated, we also need to be more diligent. And I think that's really, the way to go.
Yeah, and also sharing, right? I think sharing of information. I think, we talk a lot about all of these different sophisticated campaigns that they're running out there in terms of trying to get us with the smishing and the phishing, and I lose track of phishing and all the rest. But I think it's sharing too, because it's not just in the workplace, right? We're being attacked from a personal level too. So I think building that culture of awareness and security in your personal lives is just as important, because you bring that you bring that home and vice versa. Diego, would you like to add something on your
Definitely.
How do you personally secure?
The way I like to classify that, there are two types of people in the world and in this room. Half of you got compromised, and the other half doesn't know yet you got compromised.
That's right.
That's
will be
kind of the
You
reality.
are in the dark web.
Yes, you are there.
On the way.
For me, as a personal level, it starts at my house with my own family, right? So my grandparents, my daughter, which is now starting to get into the internet space and creating her own accounts, and how I educate her to use those, right? Create strong passwords maybe, or passwordless, something like that. Don't need to be crazy like me, adding like a Chinese character in my password to make it hard, but definitely helping them to understand. Because at the end of the day, the cyber attackers, they're gonna always try to find a way to identify the weak links even in your personal life, right? So even through your social media, where you share a lot, and people share a lot, right, on those social media. So I take care of that very carefully as well. And also how my family learns. Like one day I was doing a presentation during the pandemic about how multi-factor authentication works. I don't know if anybody saw in my LinkedIn. My daughter came to me a few days after, and she called, "Daddy, come here, I want to show something." She was 10 at that age, 9. She put this paper on her in her door, and she said, "Listen, there's an eye here, there's a keyboard and a hand. So you need to go through multi-factor authentication to get into my room now, right? You're not allowed here." So she learned something, and that was cool. So I think educating our own family is important because, you know what? Everybody has vulnerabilities.
So she's learning from you, just not jujitsu though.
Yeah, but after I heard today that salaries on AI started at $475, I'm changing contents for her.
Yeah, absolutely. Heather, would you like to add your thoughts?
I mean, I think it's a really great point that Diego talked about, and the idea that like we do have to educate our children. I think, you know, my kids have been online a while, maybe because I moved here about 5 years ago and they didn't know anybody. But, you know, we talk about not sharing personal information, not sharing, you know, strong passwords, not, you know, giving out information. It's interesting though how educated they can get about their own security. I mean, they can recover their own accounts when they get hacked. It's not if they get hacked, it's when they do, because they're on a lot of the online gaming and the different chat rooms, and they can do it themselves. And I know some people will say, hey, you have to monitor your kids online. It's like, okay, right before they set up their own account and they transfer all their gaming assets to the new account. So it's, you know, they're definitely smarter and they know how to operate that. But I think, you know, thinking about the level of sharing, and obviously we were taking pictures, we're going to post this online, and it's great that we're here. But it's also that timing of everything that you're posting and whether you're doing it in real time, and, you know, are you out of the country with your whole family and your house is empty? Right. And, you know, do you have everybody in your close network that is really somebody that you want to know that information? And just, and maybe from my Air Force background, growing up in that, I'm very protective of the personal side of my information, so I share what I want, but I have an amazing life and I don't need any of you to like it, because I like it. so.
I hear that.
Yeah,
I hear that.
So I think, but it gets even to your, you know, your personal devices, and mine are connected to my work, so they're very secure. But I even learned something this past week with my iPhone, and you know, I'm doing the settings so that you cannot turn off the network connection when the screen is locked, which is really important when somebody steals your phone, and the minute that they walk away, they disconnect it from the network, and then you can't actually use the Find My iPhone to do that. So, so that was something I reset.
Can you teach me that?
I know. If everybody
I was
wants
going to
know,
say,
yeah.
can you put that on a little note for me for later? So
I'll send it out.
That.
We'll post it to the chat. But it's definitely something that I didn't know. But one of my work colleagues just had their phone stolen, and literally they walked away. They disconnected it from cellular and the Wi-Fi, and then it was gone.
Oh wow!
So I didn't know that was a thing.
Wow.
But it is.
All right, so I have a couple more questions, but just a reminder to the audience to start thinking about some of the questions that you have, because we're going to have a session at the end where we'll have a Q&A, so just get your questions ready. So we've heard a lot about sort of this, you know, the SEC's new cybersecurity regulations, right? Mm-hmm. So how do you perceive the SEC's new cybersecurity regulations and their impact on boards specifically? And Diego, I know you obviously work very closely with government relations. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think this is a very important question. Thank you for asking that. I think the SEC change will be very positive, right? So not only for CISOs that are looking for board seats, which I am, and if you're looking for, I just graduated for the KPMG program, which was great, by the way. It was great. But it's going to elevate the level. It's going to elevate the level of conversations in the boardroom.
Yeah.
Because now boards will be, they are today, but they're going to be more responsible or accountable for cyber, so they need to understand the topic. So it's very common to you to go to a boardroom and you kind of have to explain some on the basics, right? Because they don't understand that. Even if you speak on business language, right? Which is definitely the most important. But I think the SEC change is going to help to elevate the conversation. I think having better and more savvy board members that do understand cyber, and they will start to see cyber not a cost center on the organization. They're going to start to see cyber as a business enabler, right? So you start to see some companies using cyber as a competitive advantage on their products. How secure their product? Apple does it, right? So Samsung does it. So several other companies are doing that. So when you start to have this level of change where you put more regulation, more rigor on the boardroom, to understand the content of cyber, it elevates the conversation and to change the view of cyber from this cost center to a business enabler that supports the growth of the company. So I think that's a huge transition and actually will help the CISOs to have better programs in place and support the organization and going forward.
Yeah, and I think you need to move so much from the protection aspect of it more to resiliency, right? Because at the end of the day, look, you know what, we all know the reality is it's not if, it's going to be more when, right? So I think we have to continue those conversations with the board to make sure that they're well versed on how resilient we are or not, and start sort of.
And just to piggyback on that, because I believe it's very important, right? So cyber is active battlefield, right? So if you go to the military side, so there are 4 phases of a cyber attack: before, during, after. And when. The when nobody knows, nobody can control. But you have the control of before, during, and after. Before is everything you can try to do to prevent that to happen. Your technology, your people, your processes that you put in place. The during is about your readiness. I'll be honest for you, one of the most important things for any company today is to be ready to respond to a cyber incident.
That's right, yeah.
If you don't do a tabletop exercise in your company, start doing that right now.
Yeah.
Because you need to be ready to respond when that happens.
That's right.
And then the after, the post is really lessons learned. What was the root cause? Why did it happen? And most likely you're gonna see is like very little things that were missed throughout the process. I gave an exception here. There was a vulnerability there that we knew about, but we didn't do anything. So I think if we take those things in consideration, it changed the game.
Yeah, and I wanted to add one point also when he mentioned tabletop exercises. Some folks refer to them as war games. They're sort of, simulated cyber attacks. It gives senior leadership an opportunity to understand, okay, if this happened, worst case scenario, what would we do? And through those exercises, you're able to identify, I guess, gaps in your environment. So Heather, want to know, do you want to add some thoughts to that before we go to our next question?
Yeah, I was just thinking as you're talking, just the idea of the importance of phishing and not clicking on those links and not giving up your credentials mistakenly, and that how that's being used more and more to steal information from an organization. And so Diego, as you were talking, just the idea of the before, during, and after is really thinking about like what's your, and it's a new topic, like what's your ransomware policy? Like when will you pay ransomware and when will you not? And how do you actually interact with an organization that has your data? And similar to what Diego was saying is like what actually caused it? Do you have appropriate backups of your information? Do you have the appropriate protections? But how will you interact in that? I do think it brings up that topic of the internal threats as well, because I know we saw that disclosure of the DoD information that was on Discord that was recently. So, to me, I know we talk a lot about the external threats, but internal threats with our organization is really important to understand, and making sure users only have access to the information that they need to have access to, and that's a mechanism of identifying or detecting when people are going through and getting more information than they actually needed.
That's
as
a
part of
really
that.
good point. I think that data exfiltration and insider threat and making sure that you have that discipline to be curious and action oriented to make sure that you are not vulnerable. I want to double down on testing your resiliency plan, because I think that oftentimes you may have that playbook, but if you are not testing your ability for responsiveness, your ability for, does the plan work? So whether it's testing on social engineering or testing on what will happen to your business impact analysis, what will happen to your plan in the event that that happens or this happens. The resiliency, the BCP testing component of all of our plans, if it's not tested, it's probably not going to be effective because things are moving and changing so fast. We have to be able to move with it.
And I think that the testing piece, it's really important that your executive leadership team participate.
That's right.
Right,
That's
so
right.
we normally do the technical tabletop,
decision
right?
makers.
Testing the ability to recover and restore. But there is a very important piece, is the decision-making piece of the cyber incidents. When it gets to a scale, think about a manufacturing being shut down. It's not only about the systems. You may think about that you need to send people back home, what that means from a people standpoint. So bringing the senior leaders to the tabletop and participate is really important because they're going to be ready to respond when they had to go to that decision-making phase.
Thank you. And then the last question before we go into Q&A, if we can just give a quick sort of response to this. But as we talk about security as business enablers, right? Because at the end of the day, we want to make money, right, for our organizations, but we want to do it in a secure manner. I'll start with you, Debbie. Like, how can we collaborate with the business to ensure secure data as we, for every transaction, as we trade, as we invest, as we just, our normal course of business. Can you give us some thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that collaboration is, it's price of admission. We don't have an option to not collaborate.
Yep.
If safety is our competitive advantage and trust is our highest value,
That's right.
making sure that we are highly connected and singing out of the same hymn book. Because if that is not happening, in the event of a major crisis, you will not be able to respond to it effectively if you are not collaborating today and now and building those partnerships and building trust with a workforce that is just changing.
Ever evolving, that's right.
So, it's price of admission. You have to collaborate. You do not have the option to work in a silo. Maybe you could 30 years ago, 20 years ago,
not today.
but not today.
It's
Yeah.
all about. So quickly, can both Heather, Diego, I'll start with you, and then we'll go to Heather. Can you give us some last minute thoughts, and then we'll move into Q&A?
I think for me, I'm going to challenge a concept. People normally say that where is the weak link on the program? We normally say that's the people side. But I want to challenge that. Because let's take, for example, a phishing email. For a phishing email to be clicked, a lot of things has to fail throughout the process. Your email security platform failed in stopping the phishing. Your endpoint protection failed in stopping the malware. So the end user was just a passenger, right, on this. I'm not removing their responsibility. For sure I'm not. Education is really important because they should watch for those things. But I think we need to understand, okay, what are the full flood from the phishing being sent to the person clicking that I'm failing in fixing, right, on the whole process. So I think it's important to us in our organizations, we watch for those. Don't try to find one unique spot and just fix that if you don't look in the ecosystem of your organization. People will be always people. Right? And then as people, we have emotions. In a bad day, somebody receives an email and they think that's important, that's personal, right? For sure, your CEO is not going to send you like a text message saying that they need an Apple gift card. That's not the case. I'm talking about those real
Don't pick on
phishing.
Apple because we
Not Apple. Maybe Facebook was not Apple. So, but real hard phishing is going to really look like a customer of you a manager of you or maybe a coworker of you asking for something to you. And then the education phase is important, but the whole process is important. What's the technology you have there? What's the education you have there? What's the response process you have there? So I think this ecosystem is the most important.
Heather?
Yeah, I concur. I think the idea is that organizations can set governance, they can set policy, they can monitor, you can set up technology solutions, but it really does start with people, and everyone has an individual responsibility to really be diligent in their business and their personal lives of what they're sharing and what they respond to.
Yeah. Thank you. So at this time, we have about 6 minutes. I'd love to take some questions. Hopefully you folks have done your homework and have lots of questions for our incredible panelists today. So any questions?
We have one from our virtual audience. Rene Herrera is asking, is funding for cybersecurity tools and controls sufficient across major corporations to prevent major breaches?
I'm so sorry to do that.
I think she said that is funding across major organizations sufficient to address cyber?
I mean, do you guys want to, who wants to take it? Diego, do you want to take it?
I can take that. So I think funding is a very important piece, but funding is just one component of that, right? You can have, normally when I do my budget preparation that I present to the senior leaders, I call the car wash approach. The good, the better, and the best, right? I shoot to the stars to get, right, whatever. But even if they give me all the money, I won't have people and time enough to deploy those things, right? Because you need to create process, you need to engage the different departments, you need to educate. I think funding is important, but for me it's about choosing the right strategy and technology you want to bring in place that will optimize your secure program and controls.
Yeah, and if I could just add to that too, I mean, if I put on my COO hat, you know, it's not about the money, but it is always about the money. I think that, you know, it's important to think about, you know, as an organization, it's not just about throwing money at a problem. It's really understanding, you know, what is the business that you're performing, right? And making sure that there are no gaps in that and that there are no vulnerabilities there, and we need to be very specific and intentional with where we put this money, because you can spend a ton of money on cyber threat intelligence and you could be, you know, missing the point on the security or the forensic side of things and such. So it's important, yes, funding is critical, but let's make sure that we are putting the money where it needs to be, and, you know, making sure that we're focused on the right things and prioritizing as well. Right. I think Heather, I think you were going to say something, or not, or maybe Debbie.
I mean, I think that just the requirements by the SEC have raised the awareness at the board level. Like cyber is always, it's been in like the top 10 risks to organization for a number of years, and I don't know that organizations have to report externally what their budgeting is related to it, but it definitely raises awareness of in governance where the board is saying, are we spending enough? Are we addressing the risks that could affect our reputation, could damage our brand, could affect our ability to function or serve our customers? And so I definitely think that you're seeing more governance in place and more questions because of what the SEC is asking organizations to start reporting.
Right, which goes back to ensuring that our boards really understand security and the security in our space, right, and what our gaps are and what, you know, the posture, our security posture. So it's really important that they're educated and they, you know, that they're aware of what they need to be aware of, right? So continuous communication from our CISOs is important, educating the board on a consistent basis so that they understand. So when, you know, the planning and budget time comes around and we're asking for money for specific things, that they're also in line with it because they've been advised along the way and they understand the risks, they understand why we need the funding. So thank you for that question. That was a great question. Thank
really
you.
Quickly, great job up there, all of you.
Hey, Eddie.
First off.
Another new high-tech board member.
Oh, thank you.
Go, Eddie.
And another CISO in the room.
Yeah.
And another CISO. Empire, right? Is it
Yeah,
Empire?
definitely.
Yeah.
We're building it. Quick question. I would love your thoughts on how do you think the prosecution and probational sentencing of Joel Sullivan is changing the game for CISOs or impacting the role of a CISO today?
Do you want to go first, Diego?
Diego?
I think it demonstrates the risk that we CISOs are taking on behalf of companies, liability, right? So if you think about the level of access we do have. I do work in my company, and I'm part of due diligence when we are thinking about acquiring companies. So just there's a lot of confidentiality. But for me, it's about transparency. If you look into Joe's situation, it was about transparency. And you need to have transparency to communicate the good news and the bad news to your organization.
That's right.
Right? So don't be liable and holding that breach only to yourself. You have very smart people in your organization, start from your IT, legal, to support you throughout. And I think what demonstrated to me in this case is transparency and clear communication with board level senior leaders was a critical component that failed at that case, right? If he had communicated properly, we would not have that trial.
I think we have one more question. We have got about a minute remaining, so thank you.
Sure.
Hi, how are you? What's your name?
Hi, fantastic conversation, thank you.
Hello, thank
This
you.
question comes on something that one of the speakers said about trust as a form of higher value. With disinformation being an increasing threat, right? How are companies adapting to deal with this, right? Do you guys see the formation of chief executive of disinformation at a company or being engaged in some sort of higher level discussion?
Disinformation?
Or
Go ahead.
Debbie?
I want to make sure I understand the question. So if you're thinking about disinformation and how do we distill that and sanitize in a way that is clear to our executives in terms of what is happening, I think that is the role of our geopolitical intelligence teams, our functional intelligence teams, our cyber intelligence teams, to make sure that they are clearly understanding what is the information and where is any resemblance of truth in that topic. I think the key here is when an organization is uncertain, if it is convoluted, if it is not clear, is making sure that you have the right sources to help you sort through that. Sometimes it's government agencies, sometimes it's consultants, sometimes it takes a village to make sure that you can clearly articulate, here is what we need to know and here is where we need to act. And so I don't know if that addresses your question, but I know that when we think about COVID and we think about all of the misinformation, disinformation, all things that were swirling around the efficacy of vaccines, and it's important to make sure that you have those resources, because you may not be that expert on that topic, but that you have experts that you can rely on, and that many hands make light work. I love that. I love that saying. So sometimes it's not just an internal interpretation of that information, but you'll have to go and use all of your resources at hand.
Thanks, Debbie. Heather, any parting thoughts on that? Okay. Well, I thank you very much for your question. I want to say thank you to this incredible panel. Thank you so much. Round of applause. Thank you. Thank you. I want to thank our organizers. I want to thank High Tech. This has been amazing, and thank you especially you, for your questions, your attention. I know it's a long day. I think drinks are soon. I don't know, but I definitely need
Couple
one.
more.
Thank you,
Couple more.
everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time.